Hey there, brave soul. Tonight, I want you to walk with me not through a castle hall, not through a knight's shining armor, but down into the shadows where history prefers to look away. Picture this. We're standing outside a rotting wooden door, wedged into the corner of a forgotten medieval alley. The cobblestones beneath our feet are slick with things you'd rather not name. A smell clings to the stones, wine soured into vinegar, smoke from damp straw fires, and something darker, the iron sting of waste and sweat that never quite washes away. You are a young woman with nowhere left to go, your family gone, swallowed by sickness or famine, the kinds of tragedies that medieval life handed out without mercy. The little you owned has been stripped away by creditors, piece by piece, until not even your bed remains. You've begged, you've prayed, you've knocked on doors, but each one closed tighter than the last. And now this is the only door still open, a door the world pretends not to see. Step through it, and you cease to be a person. You become part of something else, something history rarely names, something society has always used but never wanted to acknowledge. Another body fed into a machine that devours dignity in exchange for survival. But before we cross that threshold, before we breathe in the air that seeps from inside, air heavy with wine, sweat, unwashed skin, and the faint sharpness of vinegar used to disguise worse smells, I want to pause for a moment. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it, in your corner of the world? I find it fascinating to imagine this strange network of us, scattered across continents, across time zones, awake in the dark, letting history unravel itself like this. Who among you listens while cities sleep? Who listens as the sun rises? Each of you in your own silence becomes a witness to a past that never learned how to whisper. So settle in, let your breathing slow. The night is long and the past is even longer. What we are about to explore will peel away every romantic image you might have held about medieval time. No soft candlelight, no noble chivalry, just the raw, uncomfortable reality of survival, of hygiene practices, twisted to meet the demands of others, not the needs of the women themselves. This is not the medieval history sung by poets. This is the history lived in shadow. This is the disgusting hygiene of prostitutes in the Middle Ages. Let's begin. The first thing that hit you wasn't something you saw. It was a smell, so thick and heavy it felt like you could taste it. Picture the worst stable you've ever been in. Multiply that stink by 10, then add the sharp, sour stench of unwashed human bodies that hadn't touched soap or clean water in months. The air itself felt sick, filled with the filth of too many people crammed into tiny, cramped spaces with no regard for basic human dignity. Sweat wasn't just there, it was part of the place, soaked into the wooden beams, the straw-covered floors, and even the rough stone walls. In the summer, the heat made these smells worse, turning the air so toxic that even the rats stayed away from some corners. But the human sweat was maybe the least bad part of this awful smell. There was also the sharp, metallic tang of blood. Not just from fights, though those happened plenty, but from women's monthly periods. They had no proper hygiene supplies, just dirty cloth strips they used until they fell apart. The smell of old, rusty blood clung to everything. Urine was another problem. With no real bathrooms or enough chamber pots, people used corners of the rooms as toilets. The wooden floors, already warped and rotting from spilled ale and other liquids, soaked up the urine. Its sharp, ammonia-like smell burned your nose and made you desperate for clean air that didn't exist inside these walls. Vomit added to the sensory attack, whether from too much cheap wine, bad food, or the women's disgust at their daily lives. The sour smell of thrown-up meals hung in the air. Wooden buckets, when they were available, overflowed with vomit. More often, the floor caught it, and someone would toss sawdust over the mess in a weak attempt to clean it up. The smell of infection was maybe the worst of all. Open sores, untreated wounds, and diseases that spread easy in these crowded places gave off a sweet, sickly odor, like fruit gone bad in the sun. Without doctors or even basic care, small cuts turned into festering sores, adding their own awful smell to the mix of decay that filled these spaces. Once your nose was overwhelmed, your eyes started to adjust to the dim light inside. showing you sights just as bad as the smells. The walls, where you could see them through the layers of dirt, told a story of neglect and rot. Originally made of timber and wattle and daub, they were now stained and marked from years of people living in the worst conditions. Brown stains ran from the ceiling to the floor, some from leaky roofs letting in rain, others from unknown filth. The timber beams, once strong oak or ash, now sagged, soaked with moisture and rot. In some spots you could see daylight through gaps where the wood had shrunk or split, letting in dampness during England's frequent rains, not fresh air. The floors were a nightmare. Once packed earth or rough wood, they were now full of holes, rotting planks and piles of debris. Straw, meant to add comfort and soak up spills, had turned into a matted black mess that squished under your feet. This filthy floor was home to bugs, rats and bacteria, adding to the awful atmosphere. Furniture was falling apart. Wooden benches leaned at unsafe angles, their legs worn out from years of heavy use and no repair. Tables were stained with rings from countless cups and tankards, their surfaces warped and split from getting wet and drying over and over. Beds, the main tools of the trade, were the worst sight. They didn't look like proper beds at all. Straw mattresses, lumpy from use, were covered with scraps of rough sacking or worn-out wool. The straw had packed into hard, uncomfortable clumps, offering no comfort. It was also a breeding ground for fleas, lice and other pests that made sleep impossible and waking hours miserable. Blankets, when they existed, were shared by many and rarely washed, becoming stiff with dirt and bodily fluids. Their colors had faded to browns and grays, with holes letting the straw poke through, making them even more uncomfortable. The women's clothing showed their harsh lives. Their garments were a mix of old cast-offs, hand-me-downs, and clothes mended so many times the original fabric was barely there. Thread, when they had it, didn't match, creating a patchwork of repairs that showed their struggle to stay decent. Dresses, the main clothing, hung loosely on thin, malnourished bodies. The wool or linen was worn so thin it was almost see-through in places. Tears and holes were common, sewn shut with whatever thread was available or left open when there was none. The colors had faded to dull browns, grays and muddy tones. Stains from wine, mud, food and other things were permanent, looking almost like part of the design. Undergarments, if they had them, were in worse shape. Chemises and shifts, meant to protect skin from outer clothes, were so thin they offered no help. Holes and tears were everywhere, and the fabric had turned yellowish from age and dirt. Shoes were another problem. Wooden clogs, the most common footwear, were often cracked or missing pieces. They gave little comfort on the rough floors, and splinters were a constant risk. Leather shoes, when available, were cracked from getting wet and drying out, barely protecting against the weather or the floor. Stockings, made of rough wool or linen, were mended so much they looked like patched with whatever was at hand. They didn't last long against rough shoes and floors. The lack of clean water was the biggest problem. What they called water came from dirty wells or collected rainwater, more harmful than helpful for cleaning. This murky brownish liquid was nothing like the clean water even peasants had in the countryside. When used for washing, it left people dirtier, with sediment and bacteria sticking to skin and hair. Hair suffered the most, becoming matted and oily from trying to clean it with filthy water. Soap was a luxury they couldn't afford. When they had something to clean with, it was usually just ash mixed with animal fat, a harsh mix that burned skin and left it open to infection. Usually they just rubbed with rough cloth, which only spread dirt around. Bathing was almost impossible without hot water, proper containers or private spaces. People went weeks or months without a real wash. Dirt, sweat and other grime built up on skin, creating a breeding ground for bacteria and fungi that made everyone sicker. Hair care was the worst. Without clean water or soap, hair became a tangled, greasy mess full of lice and other pests. Covering hair with headscarves was as much about hiding its state as following custom. Combs, when they were available, often caused more harm than help. Pulling through tangled hair could be painful, and sometimes pieces of hair would come out entirely. Every stained dress, every unwashed face, represented a real person. These were women whose dignity had been taken away by circumstances they could not control. Most of the women arrived at these places out of desperation rather than choice. Once inside, they were trapped in a cycle that was very hard to escape. The lack of basic things like clean clothing or water was more than uncomfortable. It was dehumanizing. It affected them deeply, leaving marks on both body and mind. Living like this had a strong psychological impact. When a person cannot keep clean, when their clothing shows immediately that they are at the bottom of society, when their very presence signals their circumstances, it takes a toll. These women learn to accept conditions that would have been unimaginable in their previous lives. Many came from rural areas where, even in poverty, clean water from streams and wells was available. They had known the simple pleasure of washing their face in cold water or drying freshly cleaned clothes in the sun. The contrast between that life and the brothel left a psychological wound that never fully healed. Physical discomfort was constant. Dirty clothes, unwashed skin, and infested bedding created a state of continuous distress. Sleep was difficult when the shared straw beds teemed with insects. Eating became unpleasant because the smell of one's own body often competed with the smell of food. Even speaking could be uncomfortable because breath and mouth carried the odors of long neglect. Forming personal relationships was almost impossible. The women learned to emotionally distance themselves as a survival strategy, but this detachment came at a cost. Friendships that might have offered support or comfort were often strained or lost entirely. Every day began with the same harsh reality. There was no improvement in the rooms, no relief from the conditions, no hope of temporary comfort. Women who spent the night in straw beds that offered no comfort woke to the same stained clothing they had worn for weeks. Their skin itched and burned from dirt and neglect. Morning routines, such as they were, involved trying to appear as presentable as possible with the few resources available. This could mean finger-combing matted hair, brushing dirt from clothing with bare hands, or rinsing the mouth with whatever water was on hand, often the same contaminated water used for all other purposes. Without mirrors, women could only judge their appearance by touch or by observing the reactions of others. They learned quickly which gestures or appearances were tolerated and which were rejected. This constant reliance on others' judgment caused further psychological strain. Self-worth became tied to the tolerance of those around them, rather than personal standards of cleanliness or dignity. Food was prepared and eaten in the same contaminated space. Meals were simple and limited, consisting mostly of cheap bread, sometimes stale or moldy, with weak ale as the main beverage. Ale was often safer than water, so adults and children drank it instead. Cooking facilities were minimal, usually a single fire pit that served to heat water, cook food and warm the room. Pots and utensils, when available, were shared and cleaned only when absolutely necessary. Cleaning happened not out of concern for hygiene, but simply to allow continued use. Even in these degraded conditions, a social hierarchy developed. Women who had been in the brothel longer often had better bedding, slightly cleaner clothing, or positions closer to heat sources. Newcomers, regardless of their previous social standing, were at the bottom. The proprietor or manager held absolute authority over everything. Water, clothing, and food were distributed based on his priorities, not fairness. Resources could be withheld as punishment or used to motivate work. This created tension among women who might otherwise have helped each other. Competition for slightly cleaner bedding, better clothing, or access to water pitted inhabitants against one another. This internal struggle added mental strain on top of the physical difficulties. For women who had once been in respectable households, these conditions were a severe shock. Former servants might take orders from peasants who had been in the brothel longer. Women from well-off families might beg simply for a slightly cleaner straw bed. These circumstances undermined any sense of previous social standing and left deep psychological scars. The cycle of degradation was self-perpetuating. Poor hygiene led to disease. Disease made work harder. Harder work reduced earnings. Lower earnings meant even less access to clean clothing, soap or food. Each day compounded the hardships of the last. Cleaning oneself was temporary at best. A woman might wash her hands or face only to put on the same dirty clothes that soon recontaminated her skin. Hair, once neglected, became matted and oily, impossible to clean with the scarce tools available. Scissors were rare, and cutting hair could reduce earnings because longer hair was seen as more attractive to customers. Shared bedding made rest nearly impossible. Parasites, lice, fleas, and insects were passed quickly from one person to another. The straw mattresses never replaced, collected eggs and larvae that hatched continuously. Sleeping brought no relief, only continued exposure to the same cycle of discomfort and disease. These conditions were not accidental. They were part of a wider social and economic system that treated certain people as disposable. Women in brothels were not there by choice, but because economic necessity, family abandonment, or sheer misfortune left them with no other option. Society ignored their suffering. Merchants, craftsmen, and even neighbors demanded cleanliness and order in their own homes, but tolerated without question the inhumane conditions faced by these women. They were treated worse than livestock, though the women were human beings with feelings, hopes, and memories of better lives. The church, which often spoke about charity and compassion, largely ignored the suffering happening so close to their own walls. Local authorities rarely focused on helping the women. When they did intervene, it was usually to control problems that might affect the general population, not to improve conditions for the women themselves. Any regulations that existed were designed to stop disease from spreading to wealthier citizens, rather than to make the brothels safer or cleaner. Raids and inspections happened occasionally, but they were more about showing moral control than creating real change. The system that kept these establishments running depended on the desperation of the women inside. If women had real alternatives, they would not have stayed in such conditions. Keeping them poor, sick, and trapped served the financial interests of those who profited from their work. Any real improvement, cleaner spaces, better supplies, would have cost money and might have caused women to leave for other opportunities. Looking at this reality, it becomes clear that the hardships were not random. They were the result of a social and economic system that treated some people as less than fully human. The women who lived in brothels were real people, with names, families, and hopes. Yet most historical records do not tell their story. Each stained dress belonged to a woman who had once cared about her appearance. Each unwashed face was a person who had once experienced the simple pleasure of cleanliness. Understanding these conditions, the smells, the discomfort, the daily indignities, helps us see the full picture of life in the Middle Ages. It also shows the human capacity for both cruelty and survival. Despite everything, these women endured conditions that would have broken many people. They survived, keeping as much of their humanity as possible under impossible circumstances. Their resilience is a testimony to the human spirit, even in its darkest moments. The stench in these brothels was more than just the smell of unwashed bodies. It was the smell of dreams postponed, dignity denied, and hope systematically crushed. Yet even in this environment, humanity persisted. The women held on to the possibility of a better day, however uncertain it might have seemed. Their stories deserve to be told honestly, without romanticizing or sanitizing their lives. This reality serves as both a historical record and a reminder of the moral responsibilities any society has to those in vulnerable situations. Cleanliness in these places existed only in theory. Washing facilities were primitive and often caused more problems than they solved. At the center of any washing routine was usually a single wooden basin, carved from oak or ash, often decades old. Once smooth and well made, the wood had long since cracked and splintered, making proper cleaning impossible. The cracks held dirt, soap residue, and other matter that created permanent stains and odors. The water in this basin told its own story of neglect. It came from whatever source was convenient, a shared well or rainwater collection system. By the time it reached the basin, it was often already contaminated. Containers used to carry it were dirty, hands were unwashed, and the environment around it added further impurity. What little washing could be done with this water was far from sufficient, yet it remained the only option for the women living there. The water used for washing was always dirty. Its color changed every day, but it was never clear. On the best days, it was a light brown. Usually, it was a very dark brown, or even black. because of all the dirt and gunk in it. There was always stuff floating in it, so people would skim the top, but that didn't help the dirty water underneath. The smell was the worst part. It always had a gross, earthy smell that got much stronger the longer the water sat in the basin. It would start to smell like a swamp and burn your nose. The biggest problem was that everyone had to use the same dirty water, one after another. No one changed the water or cleaned the basin between users. The first person got the cleanest water, and the last person got water that was dirtier than their own skin. The basin was never properly cleaned, they just added more water when it got low. A thick, disgusting sludge built up at the bottom. The soap was harsh and cheap, made from ash and animal fat. It was unpredictable and could easily give you a rash or chemical burn. People used tiny amounts, rubbing it directly on their skin because the water was too dirty to make a good lather. The washcloths were just old, stained pieces of clothing. They were shared by everyone and never washed, so they spread dirt instead of cleaning it. They were usually left damp in a corner, which made them grow mold and smell terrible. After washing, people had to air dry in the dirty room, which often meant new dirt would stick to their wet skin, leaving them dirtier than when they started. There was no privacy. Everyone washed in front of each other in a common area, so people often skipped washing private areas to avoid embarrassment. Washing hair was a disaster. Dunking your head in the filthy water left hair full of bacteria. The harsh soap dried out the scalp, making it crack and get infected. There was never enough clean water to rinse it out, so the soap residue just attracted more dirt. People had to wash whenever they could get a turn, often in the cold, which was dangerous. In winter, avoiding washing was safer than risking sickness from the cold. When water was scarce, it was used even longer between changes. Sometimes people tried to improve the water by adding things like vinegar or cheap wine, hoping it would kill germs. But it was never enough to fix the horribly dirty water, and sometimes it just made new problems. The sugar in wine fed bacteria and yeast, creating new contamination problems even as it tried to solve others. Using wine for washing caused its own issues. Wine was costly for the people living in these places, and choosing to use it for cleaning instead of drinking was a big sacrifice. This sparked arguments among the women about whether it was better to use wine for washing or to drink it for health and morale. Pouring wine directly on skin to clean it had mixed results. The alcohol helped a bit, but the acids in wine irritated already damaged skin, and the sugars fed bacteria and fungi. After washing with wine, people often smelled like fermented grapes, and alcohol, not much better than the body odors they were trying to cover. Vinegar and wine were scarce and used sparingly. A little might be added to the shared washing water, but it was so diluted by the dirty water that it barely helped. Sometimes they dabbed small amounts directly on their skin, which cleaned only tiny spots and didn't fix the overall hygiene problem. Storing wine and vinegar for washing was tough. They needed containers, which were as hard to find as the liquids themselves. Wine kept in dirty containers quickly became unusable, even for washing, and vinegar lost its strength, if not stored properly. These places rarely had cool, dark storage spaces, so the liquids spoiled quickly, wasting what little they had. The lack of proper washing took a heavy toll on the women's spirits. For those who remembered clean water and soap, using filthy basins and rags was a constant reminder of their grim situation. Knowing their efforts to stay clean were useless, or even harmful, made them feel hopeless, beyond just physical discomfort. Many developed personal washing routines, like washing body parts in a certain order, or using specific techniques with the dirty water and cloth. These rituals gave a small sense of control, but they didn't solve the real problem of poor hygiene facilities. Washing also caused social tension. People fought over access to the washing basin, especially when water was low or someone took too long. Arguments sometimes turned physical. The pecking order in these places extended to washing, with longer-staying women claiming better access to water and conditions. Clothing was a clear sign of their harsh lives, showing their separation from respectable society. The women's garments weren't just old or worn. They were so ruined by use and neglect that they made the unhealthy conditions worse. Instead of offering comfort or dignity, the clothes trapped smells, carried germs, and showed everyone the wearer's miserable situation. The main issue with clothing was that there was no separation between types of garments. The women had at most one dress or outfit for everything: sleeping, working, and daily tasks. This single set of clothes carried the marks of every activity, like a record of their days, weeks, and months of constant use. These outfits were originally made of wool, linen, or rough cotton, which might have been decent in normal conditions. But in these places, even strong fabrics turned into something barely recognizable as clothing. Wool became stiff and matted from wear and dampness. Linen lost its crispness and turned limp and gray. Cotton got fuzzy and clung to every bit of dirt and grime. The original colors of the clothes were long gone, buried under layers of stains and discoloration. What was once blue wool was now a dull brown. Linen that started white or cream had turned yellowish-brown from age and neglect. Any patterns or designs were hidden under permanent dirt and stains that had become part of the fabric itself. The worst part wasn't just the dirt, but what the clothes had soaked up over time. Sweat was the biggest problem, sinking into the fabric during the day and never fully cleaned out. The constant wear without proper washing meant the clothes became a breeding ground for bacteria and odors, making the women's lives even harder. The sweat soaked into the clothes created a breeding ground for bacteria, keeping the fabric damp and smelly even when not worn. The sharp, sour odor of old sweat became part of the fabric, impossible to remove with airing or basic washing. Bloodstains marked the clothes, from monthly periods, injuries, or rare fights. Without clean water or proper washing, blood dried into dark brown or black patches, a constant reminder of pain or biology. These stains, especially on the lower parts of dresses and undergarments, made the fabric stiff and rough, rubbing skin raw and causing new sores or bleeding. Other bodily fluids added to the mess. Urine from accidents, illness, or no access to toilets left its own stains and smells. The sharp, ammonia-like odor of dried urine mixed with other rotting smells, announcing someone's presence before they were seen. Urine stains, mostly on the lower parts of clothes, discolored and weakened the fabric. Vomit stains were even worse, as stomach acid ate away at the material, creating weak spots that tore easily or formed holes, making it harder for the clothes to cover properly. The sour smell of old vomit lingered, adding to the stench of anyone wearing these filthy garments. The worst stains came from the clients visiting these places. Every encounter left marks on the clothes, especially in areas tied to the work done there, serving as grim reminders of their daily tasks. Clients' hair oils, cheap perfumes, and grooming products added more grime. Greasy patches from unwashed hair and skin attracted dirt, while harsh-smelling colognes clashed with the clothes' existing odors, making things worse. Tobacco smoke was another problem. Many clients smoked pipes or cigarettes, and the smoke soaked into the clothes, creating a stubborn smell that mixed with other odors to form a complex, unpleasant stench. The clothes fell apart under all this damage. Seams split from constant movement and weakened fabric. Areas like underarms, waists, and necks wore out fastest, developing holes and tears that grew bigger each time the clothes were worn. These holes exposed skin to more dirt and germs, while failing to cover the body properly. Repairs, when possible, used whatever thread and needles were available, often dirty themselves. The thread didn't match the fabric, making repairs obvious and weak. Needles, rare and treasured, were often so worn they made bigger holes, damaging the clothes further. Mending was a desperate effort. Patches were cut from other ruined clothes, creating a patchwork look where each fix showed another garment's failure. These patches, just as dirty as the original fabric, barely helped and added their own stains and smells. Thread was often pulled from other clothes, so fixing one item meant damaging another. Clothes were stored wherever there was space, piled on floors, hung on rough pegs, or left where they were taken off. This exposed them to more dirt, moisture, and pests, like bugs or rats. Clothes on the floor soaked up spills, while those hung up collected dust and smoke. Sharing clothes made things worse. If a woman's only outfit was being cleaned or too damaged to wear, she'd borrow from someone else, spreading bacteria, lice, and diseases through shared garments. This meant any effort to stay clean was quickly undone by wearing someone else's dirty clothes. Undergarments, if they existed, were in even worse shape than outer clothes. Chemises and shifts, meant to protect outer layers from skin, were so thin and worn they offered no help. They collected blood, sweat and other mess from daily life and work, pressing these germs against the skin all day and night, making hygiene nearly impossible. The fabric of the undergarments was so worn and thin that it was barely stronger than spider webs. It tore easily with the slightest pull, offering no comfort or protection to the women wearing it. Holes and rips were common, often growing so large that they left big parts of the body uncovered. Deciding whether to keep wearing these damaged undergarments or go without them was tough. The choice often came down to which option caused less discomfort, not which provided better coverage or hygiene, since neither option was truly helpful. When the women tried to wash their clothes, the process was so poor and rare that it often made things worse instead of better. Without hot water, proper soap, or enough clean water to rinse, cleaning clothes usually meant dipping them in cold, dirty water and maybe rubbing them against each other, or a rough surface, like a rock or a wooden board. This only removed surface dirt, while pushing deeper grime further into the fabric, making it harder to clean next time. The soap they sometimes used was the same harsh mix of ash and animal fat used for washing their bodies. This soap was too strong for delicate or worn-out fabrics, damaging the fibers and making clothes wear out faster. It could also cause colors to bleed or fade, leaving garments looking even more ragged. Worse, the combination of this harsh soap and the contaminated water often left clothes smelling worse than before, with new stains or odors that weren't there originally. Rinsing clothes properly was almost impossible because clean water was so scarce. Often, they didn't rinse at all, leaving soap residue stuck in the fabric. This residue irritated the skin, causing itching or rashes when the clothes were worn again. It also attracted dirt faster, so clean clothes got filthy again quickly. The mix of soap and dirty water sometimes created chemical reactions that produced new smells or stains, adding to the mess. For example, the soap could react with minerals in the water, leaving behind a gritty or slimy feel that made the clothes even more uncomfortable. Drying clothes was another big problem, as there were no proper drying facilities. The women had to hang their clothes wherever they could, over broken furniture on rough wooden pegs, or spread out on whatever surface was available, like a dirty floor or a table. If they hung clothes outside or in open areas, the wet fabric picked up dust, smoke, insect droppings or other particles floating in the air. This meant clothes often ended up dirtier after drying than when they were first hung up. Because drying spaces were so limited, clothes were sometimes worn while still damp. Wet clothes against the skin created a perfect environment for bacteria and fungi to grow, leading to skin infections and disease. Damp clothes also didn't keep the wearer warm and could make them lose body heat faster, especially in cold weather, making them more likely to get sick or feel miserable. The mix of moisture, body heat, and the dirt trapped in the clothes was like a breeding ground for germs. These microorganisms thrived in the damp, warm fabric, causing rashes, sores, and other health problems that made life even harder for the women. The clothes, already full of sweat, blood, and other contaminants, became a health hazard, carrying germs that spread easily in such close, unclean living conditions. Seasonal changes made maintaining clothes and staying clean even tougher. In winter, the cold made washing clothes an unpleasant task, so the women went longer between cleaning attempts. This led to more dirt, sweat, and grime building up in their garments, making them smell worse and feel heavier. The single outfit each woman owned wasn't enough to keep them warm in cold weather. Thin, worn-out clothes offered little protection against the chill, forcing the women to stay in whatever heated areas they could find or huddle together for warmth. These cramped shared spaces only spread more germs and odors, as everyone's dirty clothes and unwashed bodies were pressed close together. In warmer months, the heat made the smells trapped in the clothes even stronger, and the lack of proper washing meant sweat and dirt piled up fast. The women's single outfits, already falling apart, became unbearable to wear in the heat, sticking to their skin and causing more irritation. No matter the season, The lack of clean water, soap and proper drying spaces meant that keeping clothes even slightly clean was a constant struggle, adding to the physical and emotional burden of their daily lives. The clothes meant to provide basic comfort and dignity instead became a source of discomfort, shame, and sickness. Reflecting the harsh reality of their circumstances, the close crowding in these places made it easy for parasites and diseases to spread through shared clothes and physical contact. In summer, the heavy, filthy fabric of the garments trapped heat and sweat against the skin, with little airflow to cool the body. The extra sweating caused by the heat mixed with the dirt already in the clothes, creating new chemical reactions and making the bad smells even worse. The women couldn't take off their clothes to cool down, either because of modesty or because they had no other clothes to wear, so they suffered in the heat, feeling sticky and uncomfortable. Wearing such dirty and worn-out clothes didn't just hurt physically, it took a toll on their minds too. For women who once took pride in looking clean and neat, putting on smelly, stained clothes every day was a painful reminder of how far their lives had fallen. These garments marked them as part of the lowest social class, bringing shame and isolation that added to their struggle. The state of their clothes made it impossible to look presentable enough to seek better jobs or connections outside the establishment. Even if a chance for a better life came up, their ragged, filthy clothes would stop them from taking. Every day just getting dressed trapped them in a cycle of poverty and shame. The clothing situation also strained relationships inside the establishment. The shared dirt and bad smells made it hard to be close to others, reducing the comfort and support the women might have found in each other. Fighting over less damaged clothes or better washing opportunities created tension, making it harder to form friendships that could have helped them cope. The clothes themselves were like a badge that showed everyone the wearer's low state. The mix of stains, smells and wear made it clear they belonged to the lowest rungs of society, preventing them from blending into respectable circles or escaping the stigma, even for a short time. Health-wise, the dirty clothes were a serious problem. Bacteria, fungi and parasites living in the fabric caused ongoing issues, from skin infections to more severe illnesses. The constant contact between the contaminated clothes and skin let germs enter the body easily, and the inability to keep clothes clean meant infections kept coming back. Instead of protecting the body, the clothes became a health hazard. Children in these places faced extra challenges. Their young immune systems struggled against the germs in the adults' dirty clothes, and their small bodies were more sensitive to the discomfort of rough, filthy fabric. There were no clothes made just for kids, so they wore smaller versions of adult garments, or cut-down adult clothes, both just as dirty and germ-filled as the originals. This exposed them to harmful levels of contamination for their age. The clothing situation also had economic impact. The women couldn't look decent enough to seek better jobs or improve their lives, as their clothes gave them away instantly. Replacing ruined clothes was too expensive, and without proper storage or care, any new clothes would quickly become as bad as the old one. This kept them stuck in poverty, with no way out without outside help. The broader issue showed a complete breakdown of normal community support. In healthier communities, families, churches, or neighbors might help with clothing needs, but these women were cut off from such help, left to struggle for basic dignity without any resources most people took for granted. The state of their clothes wasn't just a list of problems, it was a system that used the basic need for clothing to control and degrade them, marking them as outcasts and ensuring their situation wouldn't change. The monthly periods that are a normal part of women's lives became another source of shame and health risks in these places. Without proper care or materials, what should have been manageable turned into a monthly crisis that showed how little dignity these women were allowed. The lack of clean supplies, privacy, or understanding made periods a source of embarrassment, infection, and isolation, affecting not just the individual, but all the women sharing these terrible conditions. The only materials for managing periods were scraps of fabric scavenged from worn-out clothes or bedding. These weren't designed for the job, just random bits of cloth, too damaged for anything else, like strips from old undergarments, or pieces of stained bed linen. These scraps were already dirty from their past uses, like cleaning or bandaging wounds, so they carried old stains and germs. When used for periods, fresh blood mixed with this old contamination, creating a perfect environment for bacteria to grow. This meant women were putting germ-filled materials against their bodies at a time when they were most at risk for infections. Preparing these makeshift menstrual pads had no rules or hygiene standards, because such things didn't exist in these places. Women tore or cut cloth into rough sizes when their period started, using whatever tools they had: dirty knives from food prep, worn needles from mending, or just their unwashed hands. The scraps varied in size and shape depending on what cloth was available, not what worked best. They might be too narrow to cover properly, too wide to manage, too thick to be comfortable, or too thin to absorb much. The rough, uneven edges from hasty cutting or tearing frayed quickly, adding to the discomfort. These materials didn't absorb well because they were already damaged from past use and poor cleaning. The worn-out fibers couldn't hold much blood, so the scraps got soaked quickly and leaked, causing embarrassment and health. The women had no choice but to use these ineffective, dirty materials, which made an already difficult situation even worse, adding to their physical and emotional burdens. The method of securing these materials in place presented additional challenges that highlighted the complete absence of appropriate undergarments or support systems. Without proper underwear or the materials to create secure fastenings, women were forced to rely on improvised solutions that were both uncomfortable and ineffective. Strips of cloth might be tied around the waist or between the legs, creating pressure points that caused chafing and discomfort while providing minimal security against movement or displacement. These makeshift fastenings often failed during normal daily activities, leading to embarrassing accidents that created additional contamination of clothing and living spaces. The fear of such accidents created additional stress and anxiety that compounded the already difficult experience of menstruation in these circumstances. Women learned to move carefully and limit their activities during their cycles, further restricting their already constrained lives and reducing their ability to earn income during these periods. The frequency with which these materials could be changed was severely limited by both the scarcity of available cloth and the absence of facilities for cleaning used materials. Unlike modern disposable products, these cloth strips needed to be cleaned and reused multiple times throughout each cycle, a process that was nearly impossible to accomplish effectively given the limited access to clean water and proper washing facilities. The result was that women often wore the same soiled materials for extended periods, creating ideal conditions for bacterial growth and infection. The cleaning process for used menstrual materials was perhaps even more inadequate than the general washing facilities available in these establishments. The same contaminated water and crude soap that served for personal washing and laundry were expected to somehow restore these heavily soiled cloth strips to a usable condition. The cold water available for cleaning was particularly ineffective at removing bloodstains and organic matter, leaving behind residues that would continue to harbor bacteria and create offensive odors. The process of cleaning these materials typically involved nothing more than rinsing them in whatever water was available and perhaps rubbing them against rough surfaces in an attempt to remove the most visible contamination. Without access to hot water or effective cleaning agents, the blood and other organic matter would set into the fabric, creating permanent stains that provided ongoing food sources for bacterial growth. These stained areas became increasingly difficult to clean with each use, creating a cumulative effect where the materials became more contaminated with each cycle. Drying these cleaned materials presented its own set of challenges within the constraints of the establishment. The same inadequate drying facilities that served for clothing and bedding were expected to handle menstrual materials, but the intimate nature of these items created additional privacy concerns that complicated the drying process. Women were often reluctant to hang such personal items in common areas where they would be visible to others. Yet private drying spaces were essentially non-existent. The result was that menstrual materials were often dried in hidden corners or concealed locations where air circulation was poor and contamination from the environment was likely. Damp, poorly ventilated spaces provided ideal conditions for mold and bacteria growth, ensuring that materials that had been cleaned, however inadequately, would be contaminated again before they could be used. The musty, sour smell of fabric that had never properly dried became permanently associated with menstrual materials. The storage of clean menstrual materials between cycles presented additional challenges in establishments where storage space was minimal and privacy was non-existent. Clean materials, such as they were, needed to be kept separate from other contaminated items while remaining accessible when needed. The absence of proper containers or storage systems meant that these materials were often kept in whatever spaces could be found, where they would inevitably become contaminated by contact with other dirty items or environmental factors. The psychological impact of managing menstruation under these conditions was profound and long-lasting. For many women, menstruation became associated not with the natural rhythm of their bodies, but with additional shame, discomfort, and degradation that added to their already overwhelming circumstance. The inability to manage their cycles with dignity and cleanliness created a monthly reminder of how far their lives had fallen from any reasonable standard of human treatment. The physical discomfort caused by inadequate menstrual materials was severe and ongoing throughout each cycle. The rough, dirty cloth strips used for menstrual protection rubbed against sensitive skin, causing raw, sore spots that easily got infected. Their uneven shapes and poor ability to soak up blood meant leaks were common, leading to embarrassment and the need to constantly check for accidents. The fear of stains showing on already ruined clothes added extra stress, making periods even more difficult to handle. Using these germ-filled cloths during menstruation created serious health risks that built up over time. Putting bacteria-laden fabric against the vaginal area during a period created perfect conditions for infections, some of which could become dangerous or even deadly without proper medical care. The cervix, naturally open slightly during menstruation, let germs from the dirty cloths enter, trapped in the warm, damp environment of poor-quality menstrual materials. This led to urinary tract infections, which caused painful burning when urinating, frequent bathroom urges, and sometimes blood in the urine, adding to the misery and shame of menstruation. Without treatment, these infections often became long-term problems, causing constant pain and health issues. Vaginal infections were even more common. The dirty cloths introduced harmful bacteria, upsetting the vagina's natural balance that usually protects against infection. This caused discharge, bad smells, and itching, piling onto the women's already long list of health struggles. More serious infections could happen if bacteria traveled up into the uterus through the open cervix, leading to pelvic inflammatory disease, a condition that could cause infertility, chronic pain, or even death if untreated. Symptoms like fever, severe stomach pain, or unusual discharge were often ignored in a place where medical care didn't exist, and suffering was seen as normal. Menstruation also brought social challenges. The bad odors from the makeshift menstrual materials made it obvious when a woman was on her period, leading to isolation or rejection by clients who found the smells unpleasant. This could mean less income during their cycle, even though they still needed money for basic survival. Sometimes women had to share menstrual materials when supplies were low, which spread germs and infections between them, creating a chain of health problems throughout the group. Sharing such personal items could build emotional bonds, but the desperation and competition in these places often made those relationships tense and complicated. Getting rid of used menstrual cloths was another problem. These blood-soaked scraps couldn't just be thrown into regular trash areas, as they would create health hazards and bad smells. But with no proper way to dispose of them, women often hid them in corners or storage spots, where they rotted and caused more contamination. Menstruation affected the daily workings of these places, as women with heavy bleeding or infection-related issues might not be able to work, losing income at a time when they were already struggling to survive. This often forced them to keep working despite pain or health problems. There was no understanding or support for menstrual health. Heavy bleeding or irregular cycles, which could signal serious issues like nutritional deficiencies, were just endured as normal. The poor diet in these places, lacking iron, vitamins, and minerals, made periods worse, often causing irregular, painful, or heavy cycles. Combined with blood loss, this poor nutrition led to anemia and other health issues, creating a cycle of declining health that was hard to escape without better living conditions. The emotional toll of menstruation was huge. For many women, their periods were a painful reminder of their ability to have children, set against the grim reality of their lives, where caring for a child was impossible. This brought extra anxiety and sadness. In a society where menstruation already carried stigma, the lack of privacy and proper supplies in these places made it worse. Visible stains, bad odors, and obvious discomfort added to the shame these women already carried, making their lives feel even more hopeless. The expectation to stay groomed, even in such awful conditions, led to dangerous practices. Removing body hair was seen as necessary to look appealing and earn more, but the tools and methods were harmful. Crude razors turned a simple grooming task into a source of pain, infection, and even scarring. These razors weren't like the sharp, well-made tools used by barbers or wealthy people. They were often broken bits of kitchen knives, scraps of larger blades, or roughly shaped iron pieces, not designed for delicate tasks like shaving sensitive areas. The quality of these makeshift razors was terrible, made from whatever metal was available, and shaped with little skill. The metal was often soft iron that dulled quickly or hard, brittle metal that chipped, creating jagged edges that cut skin. Handles, if they existed, were just cloth strips wrapped around the blade, offering little grip and no protection from cut. Sharpening these razors was done with whatever rough surfaces were around, like stones, brick pieces, or old files, by the women themselves, not skilled workers. This led to unevenly sharp blades, with some parts sharper than others, making cuts and injuries almost certain during use. These dangerous grooming practices, driven by the need to survive, added yet another layer of hardship to the women's already difficult lives. The unpredictable cutting edges of these makeshift razors made injuries unavoidable. Even when freshly sharpened, they were far from safe or effective for hair removal. The uneven surfaces, caused by clumsy sharpening attempts, tugged and pulled at hair instead of cutting it cleanly, causing pain and often yanking hair out rather than slicing it. These jagged edges also created tiny tears in the skin, opening the door for bacteria and germs to enter, which could lead to serious infections. Sharpening these razors was limited by the lack of proper tools and time. Women used rough stones, brick fragments, or old files, but the process was slow and imprecise. Most razors went weeks or months without proper care, growing duller and more dangerous with every use. A dull razor needed more force to cut hair, increasing the chance of slips, cuts, and a longer, more painful process. Sharing razors was common in these places, since resources were scarce, and few women owned their own tool. This practice was risky, as razors carried bacteria, blood, and other germs from one person to the next. Cleaning them was minimal, usually just a quick wipe with a dirty cloth, which did nothing to remove germs or sterilize the blade. This led to the spread of diseases, including blood-borne infections from tiny amounts of blood left on the razor and bacterial or fungal infections from contaminated surfaces. These shared razors caused infections to spread quickly, creating health crises that affected everyone in the establishment. The women had no proper training in safe hair removal. They learned from each other, using methods developed through guesswork rather than proper guide. These techniques focused on speed and results, not safety, guaranteeing injuries and infections with regular use. Before shaving, they used the same dirty water as for other washing, which carried bacteria that could infect the small cuts and scrapes caused by shaving. Without proper lubricants, they often shaved dry, or with just a bit of contaminated water, causing more friction and increasing the risk of serious cuts. When soap was used, it was the same harsh, caustic mix used for all cleaning. This soap was too strong for sensitive skin, causing burns and irritation worse than the cuts from dull razors. Together, the dirty water, harsh soap, and crude razors created a mix of chemical and physical damage, leaving skin raw, infected, and painful. The areas shaved, genitals, underarms, and legs, were the most sensitive parts of the body, making these crude tools especially dangerous. The thin, delicate skin in these areas was easily damaged, and the unpredictable razors made clean hair removal nearly impossible without harming the surrounding skin. Women stretched the skin with one hand while scraping with the razor in the other, a tricky task requiring skill they didn't have, especially in hard-to-see or hard-to-reach spots. This meant multiple passes over the same area, each one increasing the chance of cuts while removing less hair. The force needed with a dull razor often cut skin, causing anything from small nicks to deep gashes that bled heavily and needed immediate care to avoid worse problems. After shaving, women often dealt with bleeding from multiple cuts and the burning pain of soap residue in open wounds. The dirty water used to clean these cuts brought bacteria directly into them, almost guaranteeing infections in areas already warm and moist, perfect for germ growth. Without proper wound care, these injuries were left to heal on their own, often becoming infected. Dirty clothes and the filthy environment made things worse, as fresh wounds pressed against germ-filled fabric, and daily movement reopened healing cuts, inviting more bacteria. Infections in sensitive areas like the genitals could lead to serious problems, like abscesses, spreading infections, or permanent scarring that affected both appearance and function. These areas stayed warm and damp, ideal for bacteria, and constant exposure to dirty clothes and activities made natural healing nearly impossible. Infections from shaving ranged from minor skin irritations to dangerous ones that could spread through the body, like staph or strep infections, which could become life-threatening without treatment. Since medical care was non-existent, these infections often grew worse until they stopped women from functioning. Repeated shaving injuries caused permanent scarring, with thick, uneven scar tissue that was painful and added to the women's physical and emotional burden. The mental toll of these grooming practices was heavy. Shaving became linked with pain, bleeding, and infection, making personal care something to dread. Yet, neglecting it could mean losing clients and income, so women faced a tough choice between physical safety and economic survival. Clients preferred a groomed look, even by the low standards of these places, so women repeated the dangerous process despite the risks. They shaved at least weekly, sometimes more, to meet client expectations, leaving no time for injuries to heal before new ones were caused. This constant cycle damaged skin permanently, leaving it raw, sensitive, and prone to infection as healthy tissue was scraped away along with hair. Socially, grooming created competition. Women who managed to look more groomed, despite the risks, might earn more, pushing others to take even bigger chances. Visible cuts, scars, and infections were constant reminders of the cost of trying to look presentable. With no safer hair removal options, women had to choose between letting body hair grow and risking less income, or using dangerous razors. Wealthier people might have had better methods, but these were out of reach for these women. Long-term, repeated shaving injuries caused serious health issues, like pelvic inflammatory disease or weakened immune systems, making it harder to fight other infections. The mental strain of painful grooming added to the overall toll on their mental health, fostering self-harm tendencies or unhealthy views of personal care. Seasonal changes made things harder. Winter allowed less frequent shaving due to heavier clothing, but summer's thinner clothes and heat made grooming more necessary, despite slower healing wounds due to poor nutrition. These grooming tools and methods showed how poverty turned a simple task into a source of suffering. What should have been basic self-care became a dangerous ordeal, adding to the women's physical and emotional burden. The pressure to look groomed, despite the clear dangers, showed the impossible choices they faced. Risk their health for a chance at survival in a place that offered neither dignity nor safety. The need for quick client turnover meant cleaning between clients was rushed, prioritizing speed over safety or effectiveness. Women had little time to clean themselves or their space properly, using the same dirty water and cloth, which spread germs. This hurried process did little to improve hygiene, and often made things worse, as it relied on the same contaminated resources, adding to the cycle of infection and discomfort in these harsh conditions. The short breaks between clients were filled with rushed attempts to clean using whatever was available, no matter how unsuitable or harmful. These hurried cleaning efforts were among the most desperate parts of life in these places, as women tried to restore some sense of cleanliness with methods that were often more dangerous than the dirt they aimed to remove. The most common cleaning agent was cheap alcohol, like low-quality wine or rough spirits barely fit to drink. The burning pain from applying alcohol to sensitive, often already damaged areas, was seen as worth it for its supposed ability to kill germs. This intense pain became a normal part of the cleaning routine, linking cleanliness with suffering in the women's minds. The wine used was usually the cheapest kind, often sour or spoiled, which caused problems beyond just the alcohol. The acids in bad wine burned and irritated sensitive skin, while the sugars and organic matter fed bacteria and yeast, sometimes creating new infections even as the alcohol was meant to clean. This mix of alcohol, acids, and organic compounds was unpredictable and often harmed delicate skin. Women applied it quickly, splashing or dabbing it on with whatever cloth was at hand, often the same dirty rags used for other tasks. These rough cloths caused more irritation and spread the alcohol unevenly, leaving some areas overly burned and others barely touched, offering little real benefit. The alcohol caused intense burning that lasted long after application, making it hard to work comfortably with the next client. It also dried out the skin's natural moisture and protective layers, leaving tissues more prone to injury and infection during later encounters. Instead of protecting, this cleaning often made things worse. Another common cleaning method was salt water, believed to purify and heal. The salt was usually crude, impure rock or sea salt stored in dirty containers, adding its own germs to the mix. Women made salt water with the same contaminated water used for everything else, so the solution was often dirtier than the skin it was meant to clean. The amount of salt varied depending on what was available, not on what was safe. Too much salt caused severe burning or chemical burns, while too little did nothing useful but still hurt. With no proper way to measure, the salt levels were inconsistent, making results range from useless to harmful. Applying salt water to sensitive areas caused sharp, lasting burning, often worse than alcohol. The salt dissolved slowly, prolonging the pain for hours. It also pulled moisture from the skin, causing dryness and cracks that invited bacteria and made later encounters more painful and likely to cause injury. Women used salt water not just for cleaning but also to treat infections or wounds, which often worsened things. The salt could push bacteria deeper into tissues or disrupt healing, making infections worse instead of better. Wood ash was one of the most dangerous cleaning substances, mistakenly thought to kill germs because of its alkaline nature. The ash came from whatever fires were burning, whether from coal, treated wood, or trash, carrying toxic compounds and contaminants. Mixed with dirty water, it formed a harsh, caustic paste that could cause severe chemical burn. Its high alkalinity was far too strong for human skin, but the burning was seen as proof it was working, not a sign of damage. Applying ash caused intense pain, often leading to cries that echoed through the building. It damaged protective skin layers, leaving raw, painful areas prone to infection and disrupting the body's natural bacterial balance, making harmful germs thrive. Tree bark, believed to have healing properties, was sometimes ground into powder or mixed with water to make a paste for cleaning. The bark was gathered from nearby trees without knowing if it was safe. Some contained tannins or chemicals that caused allergic reactions or burns on sensitive skin. Grinding bark with crude tools added dirt, bugs, and bacteria to the mix. The coarse powder scratched and cut delicate skin during application, while its chemicals caused burning and irritation. The combination of rough texture and harmful compounds led to pain, bleeding, and swelling that lasted for days. The rush to clean between clients meant there was no time for careful preparation or gentle application. Women used these harmful substances quickly and roughly, increasing the chance of injury and reducing any benefit. The constant pressure to get back to work led to sloppy methods that caused more harm than good. The mental toll of these painful cleaning routines was deep. The link between cleaning and pain created lasting stress and fear, making every client encounter hard. Knowing each one would end with a painful cleaning ritual added anxiety that made work itself more traumatic. Over time, repeated use of these harsh cleaning agents caused lasting damage. Chemical burns formed scar tissue that was less sensitive but also less functional, weakening the skin's natural defenses. This made women more prone to infections and injuries, as their bodies struggled to maintain healthy bacterial balance. The cycle of pain, damage, and infection from these rushed, harmful cleaning methods added to the physical and emotional burdens of life in these harsh conditions, turning a basic act of hygiene into a source of ongoing suffering. The social pressures around these cleaning practices created tension and competition among the women. Those who endured the most painful cleaning methods were often seen as more dedicated or professional, pushing others to follow suit with equally harmful routines. The visible scars and burns from these efforts became a strange badge of commitment, showing they were trying to meet the impossible standards of cleanliness, even if those standards were flawed. The need to earn money drove these dangerous practices, as short-term financial needs always trumped long-term health concerns. Women believed clients preferred those who looked clean, even if that cleanliness came from harmful methods. So they kept up these painful rituals despite the obvious damage. The urgent need for income left them no choice but to use cleaning methods they knew were harmful, trapping them in a cycle where desperation led to self-inflicted injury. The women's lack of knowledge about hygiene and anatomy meant they often cleaned the wrong areas or used methods that made things worse. They thought harsher cleaning was better, but this stripped away protective bodily secretions and healthy bacteria while failing to remove real contaminants. The belief that pain meant the cleaning was working led them to favor the most damaging methods, thinking they were the best. The cleaning agents were stored in the same filthy environment as everything else, so even potentially helpful substances like alcohol became contaminated. Alcohol kept in dirty containers picked up germs from past contents, while salt and ash stored in damp conditions grew bacteria and fungi. These cleaning agents meant to reduce germs often brought new infections instead. The availability of cleaning materials changed with the seasons, making consistent hygiene even harder. Tree bark was easier to find at certain times, while alcohol quality and supply varied with local production and cost. This meant cleaning methods shifted based on what was available, not what was safest or most effective, leading to unpredictable risks and results. The long-term health effects went beyond immediate pain and skin damage. Repeated chemical burns caused permanent scarring and loss of function in sensitive areas, while disrupted bacterial balance led to chronic infections that harmed overall health. The mental toll was just as bad, with the trauma of these painful routines causing lasting psychological issues, making it hard to form healthy relationships or maintain positive views of personal care. Hair was one of the clearest signs of the women's harsh circumstances, turning what should have been a feature of beauty into a matted, parasite-infested mess. It brought discomfort, disease, and shame, reminding them of the impossible cleanliness standards they could never meet. Managing hair problems in these conditions often created more issues than it solved, mirroring the overall decline of their lives. Hair no longer looked like the well-kept locks of respectable society. Months of washing with dirty water and harsh soap turned even the finest hair into a brittle, coarse mass that broke and split easily. The natural oils that should have kept hair healthy were stripped away by caustic cleaners, leaving strands dry and damaged by rough bedding, dirty clothes, and the filthy environment. Dirt, smoke, and other particles settled into the hair, changing its color permanently. Blonde hair turned muddy brown, and darker hair became a dull, dirty gray, making it impossible to tell the original shade. Cooking smoke, tobacco residue, and other grime formed a layer so embedded that no amount of washing could remove it. The texture of hair changed due to poor diet, bad care, and environmental damage. Once soft and manageable, it became rough and wiry, impossible to style. Harsh cleaning agents damaged the hair's outer layer, making it dull and prone to catching dirt. Without proper conditioners, hair stayed tangled and hard to manage. Hair length varied not by choice, but by necessity. Some women kept long hair, hanging in matted clumps, too tangled to style but too valued to cut. Others cut their hair short due to severe damage or infestations, as it was the only way to manage it. Tangles weren't just from lack of brushing. Dirt, food bits, dead skin, and other debris collected in the hair, binding strands into knots that tightened with movement and more grime. These knots became impossible to untangle without pain and hair loss. The tools for hair care were as poor as those for other hygiene tasks. Crude combs, made from wood or bone, were often broken or rough, shared among women without cleaning, spreading germs. These combs were useless against severe tangles, often breaking or damaging hair further instead of improving it. Trying to detangle matted hair was painful and ineffective, causing significant hair loss without making it look or feel better. The constant struggle to manage hair in these conditions added to the women's physical and emotional burdens, reinforcing the cycle of degradation that defined their lives. Parasites like lice thrived in the dirty, tangled hair, spreading easily in the crowded environment and causing itching, infections, and more shame. The lack of proper tools and cleaning methods made it impossible to maintain healthy hair, leaving it as a visible symbol of their hardship and isolation. The force needed to drag a rough comb through months of tangled, matted hair often broke strands or yanked them out by the roots, causing pain and further damage to already sore scalps. These grooming attempts were so painful they could bring tears and sometimes cause bleeding where hair was forcibly pulled out. Lice were a constant, widespread problem in these places, with nearly every woman carrying thriving colonies of these parasites in their dirty, tangled hair. The warm, damp environment of unwashed hair was perfect for lice to live and breed, creating large, visible populations that caused endless itching and discomfort. Without effective ways to control them, lice multiplied rapidly. Adult lice laid eggs, called nits, which stuck tightly to hair near the scalp, where it was warm and moist. These nits were nearly impossible to remove without proper tools, ensuring new lice would keep hatching, even if some adults were killed. Lice bites caused relentless itching, leading to constant scratching that opened wounds and invited infections. Scratching became a habit, with women doing it without thinking, creating patterns of self-inflicted injuries that added to their health problems. The nits, even after hatching, stayed stuck to the hair, adding a gritty texture and catching more debris, which worsened tangles. Lice spread easily in the crowded conditions through shared bedding, clothes and grooming tools like combs, which were never cleaned. This ensured that any effort to reduce lice was quickly undone by reinfection from others or the environment. Other parasites like mites and fleas also thrived in the hair, adding more biting and irritation, making infestations even worse with multiple species interacting. Attempts to control parasites were mostly useless and often caused more harm. Women used harsh substances like vinegar, alcohol, or plant extracts, believing they would kill lice. These burned the scalp, but barely dented the parasite population. Vinegar, thought to kill lice and loosen nits, was too weak in the amounts used and irritated damaged scalps, making hair more brittle. Fine-toothed lice combs were unavailable, so women used the same crude combs for regular grooming, which couldn't catch lice and often damaged hair and scalps further. The mental toll of living with parasites was heavy. Knowing their hair was infested added to feelings of shame and filth, beyond the physical discomfort of itching. Visible lice and nits were a constant reminder of their degraded lives, and the social stigma made it harder to form supportive bonds with others. Head coverings, like scraps of cloth or worn scarves, were used to hide matted, infested hair and protect it from dust and smoke, but these were as dirty as everything else, adding more germs and smells. Tight head coverings caused hair breakage and scalp sores, and wet ones took days to dry, fostering bacteria and fungi. Cutting hair short or shaving it off was a last resort when infestations or damage became unbearable. This eliminated some problems but brought new ones, like exposure to cold and social stigma. The tools, dull knives or broken razors, were dangerous, causing uneven cuts or scalp injury. Shaving revealed sores, scratches and hair loss from malnutrition or disease, making the scalp's poor condition obvious. New hair grew back quickly, infested and weak, due to ongoing poor care and nutrition. Economically, better-looking hair could attract more clients, so women kept long hair despite the health risks, prioritizing income over comfort. Seasonal changes affected hair issues. Cold slowed parasite growth but made washing harder, while heat sped up infestations and added sweat and oil, worsening tangles. Chronic scalp infections from scratching could spread, and the stress of infestations weakened immunity, contributing to mental health struggles like depression. Teeth and oral health were another clear sign of the women's harsh lives, affecting comfort, appearance and income from close contact work. Without dental care, poor nutrition, and exposure to harmful substances, teeth decayed rapidly. Enamel wore away from abrasive cleaning, and weak nutrition left teeth brittle, leading to cavities, breakage, and infections. Teeth turned yellow, brown, or black from food, drink, and cleaning attempts, with stains sinking deep into the tooth structure. Rough, pitted surfaces from decay and harsh cleaning trapped bacteria and food, worsening decay and discomfort. Cavities, ranging from small to large holes, were common and worsened without treatment, causing constant, throbbing pain that disrupted eating, sleeping, and working. Tooth loss from decay or trauma altered bite patterns, speech, and appearance, reducing earning potential. Inflamed, bleeding gums from gingivitis or worse added pain and bad breath, a mix of decay, infection, and metallic blood odor. Oral cleaning attempts used harmful materials like chewing sticks made from random wood, which could splinter, irritate gums, or get stuck in cavities. Herbs, chewed for supposed medicinal benefits, were often toxic or contaminated, worsening oral issues. Salt, used for its abrasive and antimicrobial properties, burned gums and damaged enamel, while charcoal from dirty fires added toxins and trapped particles, darkening teeth. Rancid oils coated teeth, fostering bacteria and bad odor. Poor nutrition and oral health fed into each other, with pain making eating harder and weak diets worsening dental issues, creating a cycle of decline. Bad breath, a mix of decay, infection, and cleaning attempts, was worst in the morning due to dry mouth and overnight bacterial growth. Socially, it repelled clients, lowering income, while visible dental damage caused shame and reduced confidence. Painful eating led to soft, low-nutrient diets, weakening jaw muscles and saliva production, further harming oral health. Sleep loss from dental pain increased stress and weakened immunity, making all health issues worse. Skin told a story of neglect and abuse, no longer protecting but suffering from infections, wounds and dirt, stains and chronic inflammation discolored and roughened skin, with hands and forearms showing dark or red patches from dirty water and harsh cleaners. Joints and pressure points thickened from constant friction. Without natural oils, skin cracked and became prone to infections, reflecting the relentless hardship of their lives. The rough, damaged skin often snagged on clothing and bedding, causing more irritation and potential injury. Hands showed the harshest signs of their circumstances, with chronic dryness, deep cracks, and infections that made work painful and difficult. Constant exposure to dirty water, harsh cleaning agents, and rough surfaces ensured skin could never heal properly, worsening over time. Palms developed deep, painful cracks along natural lines, bleeding and prone to infection due to constant movement. Fingertips, meant to be sensitive for delicate tasks, became thick and calloused, splitting easily and risking infection. The backs of hands showed discoloration from chemical burns or inflammation, with veins and tendons standing out due to thin, damaged skin. Sun exposure and poor health aged hands prematurely. Fingernails were brittle, discolored or lost entirely, with inflamed cuticles adding pain and infection risks. Arms bore bruises, scratches and marks from scratching parasite bites. Underarms, warm and moist, fostered bacterial and fungal infection. Legs showed damage from dirty floors, bedding and poor circulation, with thighs developing painful ulcers from friction and poor hygiene. These ulcers grew deep, with inflamed edges and foul-smelling drainage, spreading infection to clothing and bedding. Treatment attempts using alcohol, salt water, or plant extracts often caused more harm, burning wounds and delaying healing. Fungal infections thrived in the moist, unclean environment, causing itchy, spreading patches. Feet, exposed to filthy floors and lacking proper footwear, developed infections from constant dampness. Bacterial infections, from minor to life-threatening, were inevitable due to cuts, poor hygiene, and weakened immune systems from malnutrition and stress. Visible skin issues hurt earning potential, as clients avoided women with obvious infections, adding social stigma. Seasonal changes worsened skin problems. Cold slowed healing, while heat increased sweating and infection. Chronic infections caused systemic health issues and extensive scarring, limited mobility and self-esteem. The psychological toll of living with painful, disfigured skin deepened depression and hopelessness. Women absorbed contamination from clients, laborers brought sweat and dirt, craftsmen carried trade-specific odors, like coal or tanning chemicals, and farmers transferred animal waste. Merchants added road dust and product residues, soldiers brought blood and gunpowder smells, and religious figures carried unwashed odors from ascetic practices. Wine and tobacco use added sour, smoky odors, while cheap perfumes clashed with natural smell. Clients' diseases, like venereal infections, spread through contact, worsened by their dirty clothing. Saliva and breath from close contact transferred bacteria, adding to oral and respiratory issues. Accumulated odors grew worse throughout the day, deepening the women's sense of degradation and loss of identity. Death in these places was a grim result of untreated diseases, malnutrition, and relentless degradation. It was slow and painful, with infections spreading systemically, respiratory issues turning fatal, or childbirth complications proving deadly. Violence from clients or conflicts also caused deaths, often ignored by authority. Women accustomed to chronic illness might not notice fatal conditions until too late, with no medical care to intervene. Dying women were isolated, lying on filthy bedding without pain relief or spiritual comfort, as religious figures shunned. Family support was absent, and deaths went unnoticed amid the establishment's chaos. Bodies were hastily wrapped in dirty cloth and buried in mass graves, without markers or ceremonies, reflecting their social worthlessness. Survivors suppressed grief to keep working, and deaths had little economic impact, as new women quickly replaced the dead. The psychological toll of witnessing death reinforced their own likely fate, deepening society's indifference to these deaths showed a moral failure, treating women as disposable. Their suffering, unrecorded, left no legacy, erased from history. The economy of these places relied on creating and exploiting vulnerability through predatory debt, legal disadvantages, and commodification of people. Women, stripped of protections, were forced into degrading work. Debt slavery trapped them with impossible interest rates, enforced by legal and violent means. Human trafficking networks moved people like goods, blending with legitimate trade. Exploitation facilities maximized profit by minimizing care, treating human welfare as a cost to cut. Competition drove harsher treatment, and taxes and bribes profited authorities, embedding this economy in society. Financing came from shady investments, with records tracking human value like any asset. Seasonal surges in desperation fueled supply, while urban locations balanced demand and secrecy. Innovations improved exploitation efficiency, prioritizing profit over humanity. This dark history teaches us to recognize and resist systems that exploit the vulnerable. Honoring these women's suffering means building societies that prioritize dignity, compassion, and justice over profit. The choice to learn from or repeat these horrors is ours, demanding eternal vigilance to protect human worth.